Alright, folks, settle in, because I've got a story that'll crawl under your skin and stay there, whispering long after you've turned out the lights. This isn't just any old ghost tale, it's one I heard from a guy at a dive bar years ago, his hands shaking as he swore it was true. It's the kind of story that makes you wonder what's waiting in the shadows of our world, and whether some questions are better left unanswered. So, grab a cup of something warm, pull the blankets close, and let me take you back to 1983, to a place where science went too far and a man named Walter Grayson learned what happens when you strip away everything that makes you human. This one's for the grown-ups, so brace yourselves, it's gonna be a bumpy ride. It was November 1983, and the world was a strange place. Walkmans blared synthpop, the Cold War had folks checking under their beds for spies, and in a forgotten corner of Ohio, a squat, windowless building sat like a scar on the landscape. The locals called it the bunker, though its official name was Facility 47, a government-funded lab where the line between brilliance and madness got blurry. Inside those concrete walls, a team of scientists led by Dr. Leonard Voss was chasing something bigger than grants or glory. Voss was a neuroscientist with a fire in his eyes and a theory that'd make most folks cross the street to avoid him. He believed the five senses, sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, were prison bars, keeping humanity from the divine. Strip them away, he said, and you'd find God himself, waiting on the other side of the static. Voss wasn't your average egghead. He had a voice like gravel and a stare that could pin you to the wall, the kind of man who'd argue with a thunderstorm and win. His team, 6 PhDs, each with their own demons, followed him like disciples, half in awe, half terrified. They'd spent years mapping the brain, but Voss's new project was something else entirely, a human experiment to sever every sensory nerve, leaving the subject's mind bare to the universe. It was the kind of idea that sounded noble in a lecture hall but turned your stomach when you thought it through. Problem was, they needed a volunteer, someone desperate enough to let a bunch of lab coats carve away their reality. That's where Walter Grayson comes in. Walter was 68, a man who carried his years like a heavy coat. His hair was thin and gray, his eyes sunken from too many nights staring at nothing. He'd been a mechanic once, back when his hands were steady and his wife, Clara, was alive. Clara was his anchor, her laugh could light up a room, and her Sunday pot roast, burned or not, was the taste of home. But cancer took her in '73, and Walter's world went dark. No kids, no kin, just a rented room above a laundromat and a bottle of bourbon to dull the ache. When he saw an ad in the paper, volunteers needed for scientific study, generous compensation, he figured, why not? Ain't got much left to lose, he told the recruiter, his voice rough but steady. If he'd known what was coming, he'd have run the other way. Facility 47 was a maze of sterile halls and humming machines, the air thick with antiseptic and ambition. Walter arrived on a rainy Tuesday, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and signed a stack of forms without reading a word. The scientist sized him up, Dr. Patel, the quiet one with kind eyes, Dr. Hargrove, who chain-smoked and muttered about ethics, and Voss, who shook Walter's hand like he was greeting a lab rat. They led him to a room that looked more like an operating theater than a bedroom, all gleaming steel and blinking monitors. The plan was monstrous in its precision, a 16-hour surgery to disconnect every sensory nerve from Walter's brain. Sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, gone. They'd keep his motor function so he could move, but his mind would be an island, cut off from the world. The surgery was a nightmare of its own. Voss stood over Walter's open skull, his hands dancing with a surgeon's grace, while machines whirred and beeped like a choir of the damned. Patel monitored vitals, her jaw tight, Hargrove chain-smoked outside, unable to watch. They snipped nerves one by one, each cut a step toward something no one fully understood. When it was over, Walter lay still, his chest rising and falling, but his face blank as a fresh canvas. They moved him to a padded room, all soft walls and dim lights, and waited. When Walter woke, he wasn't Walter anymore, not really. He could walk, clumsy as a newborn colt, but his eyes saw nothing, just endless black. His ears caught no sound, not the hum of the air vents or the scratch of pens on clipboards. He couldn't feel the cold floor under his bare feet, couldn't smell the bleach in the air or taste the water they fed him through a tube. His world was gone, replaced by a void where thoughts echoed like footsteps in a cave. The scientists watched through one-way glass, Voss scribbling notes, Patel whispering prayers under her breath. Walter shuffled in circles, muttering words he couldn't hear. "Clara? You out there?" His voice a ghost of itself. For 3 days, it was just that, Walter, lost in his head, mumbling to shadows. The team figured he'd crack soon. Sensory deprivation does that, twists the mind until it breaks. But on day 4, something shifted. Walter stopped moving. He sat on the floor, legs crossed, head tilted like a dog hearing a whistle. They gave him a notepad, and his hands, shaking but sure, scrawled, "Hiss. Voices. Can't understand." Voss frowned, tapping his pen. "Early psychosis," he said, but Patel wasn't so sure. She'd seen Walter's face, the way his blind eyes darted, like he was tracking something in the dark. By day 6, the notepad was full. Walter wrote in bursts, his letters jagged. "Clara's here. She's talking. Says she misses me." The team froze. Clara, dead a decade, was a name they'd only read in his file. Walter kept going, describing her voice, soft, like wind through a screen door, and memories no one could fake. Their first date at a county fair, the Ferris wheel breaking down, Clara laughing as they dangled in the sky. Voss grilled him, demanding details. Walter's answers were perfect, down to the song playing on the radio the night Clara died. The room grew heavy, the air thick with questions no one dared ask. Then it got stranger. Walter started naming others, dead parents, siblings, friends of the scientists themselves. He wrote about Patel's father, a stern man who died in '64, mentioning a fishing trip and a fight over a broken reel. He described Hargrove's sister, lost to leukemia, her habit of braiding daisies into her hair. Things Walter couldn't know, shouldn't know. The team's unease turned to dread. Hargrove quit smoking and started drinking. Patel stopped sleeping. Voss, though, was electrified. "He's breaking through," he said, his voice feverish. "We're on the edge of God." But Walter wasn't breaking through, he was breaking apart. By day 8, the voices weren't just Clara's. They were a swarm, buzzing like static, relentless. Walter stopped writing, too overwhelmed to grip a pen. He'd rock on his heels, muttering, "Too many. They won't stop." He'd slam his fists against the walls, not for pain, he couldn't feel it, but for proof he still existed. The scientists watched, horrified, as he begged for sleep, for silence, for anything to drown the chorus in his head. They gave him sedatives, enough to knock out a horse. It worked for 2 days, a fragile mercy. Then the nightmares came. Walter would wake screaming, his blind eyes wild, babbling about them, the dead, crowding his dreams like moths to a flame. Their faces were wrong, he said, gray and stretched, their voices sharp as broken glass. "They're not resting," he'd sob. "They're angry. They know things." He'd thrash against the hands that held him, desperate for sensation, for proof he wasn't one of them. One night, he clawed his face, nails digging into his useless eyes until blood painted his cheeks. They strapped him to a bed after that, leather cuffs biting skin he couldn't feel. His screams echoed down the halls, a sound that made even Voss flinch. By day 11, Walter was a husk. The voices had turned vicious, he said, hissing about hell, about endings, about a world burned clean. He'd shout for hours, voice cracking, "No heaven. No forgiveness. They're all gone." Patel cried in the break room. Hargrove vanished for a day, came back reeking of whiskey. Voss clung to his theory, but his eyes were haunted now, flickering with doubt. "He's close," he'd mutter, more to himself than anyone else. "God's there. I know it." On day 12, Walter changed again. He stopped fighting. Stopped screaming. He lay still, strapped to the bed, staring at the ceiling with eyes that saw nothing but wept endlessly. Tears carved tracks down his face, pooling on the pillow. The scientists had to force water into him every few hours, his body wasting away. They thought he was gone, his mind shattered beyond repair. But on day 13, he moved. Walter turned his head, slow as a glacier, and looked at Voss, or seemed to. His blind eyes locked onto the scientists, unseeing but alive with something awful, something that made the air in the room turn to ice. Everyone froze. Patel, Hargrove, the techs, even the machines seemed to hold their breath. In a whisper thin as a spider's thread, Walter said, "I spoke to God, and He's abandoned us." His voice wasn't his own anymore. It was too old, too heavy, like it came from somewhere deeper than his bones. Then his body sagged. The monitors screamed, flatline, no pulse, no brain activity. Walter Grayson was gone, dead in an instant, no cause, no reason. The lab fell apart after that. Voss vanished, some say to a monastery, others to a madhouse. Patel burned her notes and left science for good. Hargrove was found in his car a month later, a bottle in his hand and a bullet in his head. Facility 47 was sealed, its records buried, but the story didn't die. It spread, a whisper in bars and backrooms, a warning about what happens when you dig too deep into the dark. What did Walter hear in those final days? Was it madness, or something real, something that saw him and spoke back? And if he found God, what kind of God leaves a man broken, weeping, whispering of abandonment? I don't know, folks, and maybe that's the scariest part. Some truths aren't meant for us to touch. So, there you have it, the tale of Walter Grayson and the experiment that tore open a door better left shut. I hope it gave you the shivers you were after, but not so many you're afraid to close your eyes. Thanks for listening, and here's to a good night's sleep. May your dreams be quieter than Walter's were. Sweet dreams, everyone. I've got a story for you that still gives me chills, even though it didn't happen to me. It's about my buddy, Sarah, who's been like a magnet for weird stuff since we were kids. She's the kind of person who believes in ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, you name it. I used to tease her about it, but after she told me this one, I stopped laughing. She swears it's true, and knowing her, I believe it. It's the kind of thing that makes you wonder what's lurking out there, and hope you never find out. This happened back in January, right before Epiphany, that church holiday with all the ice baths and blessings. Sarah was maybe 16 or 17 at the time, still living in her family's old apartment on the edge of town. It was one of those boxy, gray buildings from the 80s, nothing fancy, just 4 floors of concrete and peeling paint. Her parents had taken off to visit relatives. Her older brother, Jake, was crashing at a friend's place, and she had the place to herself for a few days. She didn't mind. Sarah always said she liked the quiet, no one bugging her to do chores or turn down her music. Plus, it was her childhood home. She knew every creak, every shadow. What could go wrong? That first night, she stayed up late flipping through some old magazines, fashion stuff, celebrity gossip, whatever teenagers read back then. She crashed around midnight, the apartment dead silent except for the hum of the radiator. Then, at like 2 a.m., she jolted awake. Something was tapping on the window in Jake's room next door. Not a branch or the wind, it was sharp, deliberate, like knuckles rapping on glass. You know that sound, right? The hollow knock-knock-knock against a modern plastic window frame. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the stillness like a knife. She lay there, blinking in the dark, her breath shallow. It's nothing, she told herself. Just a dream. She waited, ears straining. 5 minutes passed, silence. Her eyelids drooped, and she started drifting off. Then it came again, louder, more insistent, knock-knock-knock. Her heart kicked into overdrive. She sat up, clutching the blanket, staring at the closed door to Jake's room. He always locked it when he left, some weird habit of his, and the key hung in the lock on her side. She wasn't about to go check it out. Who knocks on a 4th-floor window in the dead of night? A bird? A prankster with a ladder? Her mind raced, but none of it made sense. She glanced at her own window, the curtains half open, letting in a sliver of moonlight. A sick thought hit her. If something was out there, what's stopping it from tapping on her glass? Her chest tightened, her throat closing up like she couldn't breathe. She scrambled out of bed, yanked the curtains shut so hard the rod rattled, and dove back under the covers. It wasn't much, but it felt safer, like pulling a shield over her head. Her imagination was already running wild, bony fingers, hollow eyes, every monster she'd ever seen in a horror flick clawing at the edges of her brain. Then it got worse. The knocking stopped, but a new sound came, 3 hard thumps against the inside of Jake's door. Not from the hall, but from inside his room. She froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. Whatever it was had moved. She slipped out of bed, barefoot on the icy floor, and crept to the door. Her hand shook as she pulled the key from the lock and gripped it like a weapon. She pressed her ear to the wood, nothing at first, just her own ragged breathing. But she felt it, a presence, heavy and close, right on the other side. It wasn't Jake, he was miles away. So what the hell was in there? Minutes dragged by. No more thumps. She started to think maybe she'd imagined it, that her nerves were playing tricks. Then came the scratching, slow, deliberate, like nails dragging down the door. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make her stomach lurch. She pictured something clawing at the gap, trying to pry it open, its fingers, or whatever it had, scraping the paint. Her knees wobbled, nausea rising. She couldn't think straight, couldn't scream. All she could do was stumble to the bathroom, lock the door, and huddle on the tile floor, shaking until the sun came up. Morning light made it bearable. She crept out, key still in hand, and checked the apartment. Jake's door was still locked, the windows shut tight. Nothing looked off, no scratches, no footprints, no broken glass. But she couldn't shake it. She'd always hated Jake's room, something about it felt wrong, even when they were kids. She'd avoid it, making excuses not to grab something for him or play in there. It wasn't the mess or the posters of heavy metal bands, it was a vibe, like the air was thicker, heavier. She never told anyone, figured it was just her being weird. Now she wasn't so sure. Sarah didn't sleep much the next few days. She kept the TV on, the lights blazing, anything to drown out the quiet. Her family came back eventually, and she didn't tell them, not right away. What would she say? "Hey, Mom, something creepy banged on Jake's door while you were gone?" They'd laugh or send her to a shrink. But it stuck with her. She started digging into it, reading up on ghosts, demons, whatever might explain it. She found stories about restless spirits tied to places, things that didn't like being alone. Jake's room had always been his domain, he'd lived there since they moved in as kids. Maybe something lingered from before, something he'd ticked off with his loud music and dumb teenage stunts. She told me about it a few weeks later, over coffee at this dingy diner we used to hang out at. Her hands shook as she stirred her mug, her eyes darting like she expected something to jump out. "I swear, it was waiting for me," she said. "Like it wanted me to open that door." I asked if she'd heard it again. She shook her head. "Not since everyone came back. But I don't go in there anymore. Jake can get his own damn socks." I half laughed, but she didn't. She looked dead serious. Things got quiet for a while. Life went on, school, part-time jobs, the usual. But Sarah couldn't let it go. She'd call me sometimes, late at night, whispering about new theories. "Maybe it's a poltergeist," she'd say. Or something older, like a shadow person. I'd humor her, but I didn't know what to think. Then, a year later, it happened again. Jake had moved out for college, and her parents were away again, same deal, pre-holiday chaos. Sarah was alone, and she wasn't taking chances. She slept with every light on, a baseball bat by the bed, and Jake's door double-checked, key tucked in a drawer. She woke up at 2 a.m., same time, same deal. Knocking on Jake's window, sharp and clear. She gripped the bat, her knuckles white, and waited. It stopped, then started again on the door, thump, thump, thump. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The scratching came next, longer this time, like it was pissed she wouldn't play along. She told me later she heard something else, a low, raspy hum, almost like a voice, but too garbled to make out. It went on for an hour, she said, fading just before dawn. She didn't hide in the bathroom this time, she sat there, bat in hand, staring at the door, daring it to open. After that, she got serious about figuring it out. She dragged me along to the library, flipping through dusty books on hauntings and local history. We found nothing about the building, no murders, no tragedies, just a boring slab of concrete. But Sarah wasn't convinced. "It's tied to that room," she insisted. "Something stuck there." She started asking Jake questions, casual stuff, like if he'd ever seen anything weird. He shrugged it off. "Just you being a freak," he'd say, smirking. But once, when he'd had a few beers, he let slip he'd always felt watched in there, especially at night. He laughed it off, but Sarah didn't. She moved out not long after, crashing with a friend until she could afford her own place. The apartment's still there, her parents sold it eventually, and some new family lives there now. Sarah won't go back, not even to drive by. She's got a decent job now, a little house with her boyfriend, and she's mostly put it behind her. But every January, she gets jumpy. It's like I can still hear it, she told me once, her voice low. That knock. I don't ever want to know what was on the other side. Last time we talked about it, she dug up some old folklore about Epiphany, how the days before are when spirits get restless, slipping through cracks in the world. She thinks whatever it was came out then, drawn to the empty apartment, or maybe to her. I don't know if I buy it, but I don't sleep with my window open in January anymore, just in case. Sarah's fine now, mostly. She's got a dog, a big, loud one, that barks at shadows, and she says it helps. But she'll never forget that night, or the feeling of something waiting, inches away, behind a locked door.
You're not gonna believe what my buddy Charlie went through back in New Orleans. He's the last guy you'd expect to get mixed up with something paranormal. Works as a mechanic, cracks bad jokes, drinks Bud Light like it's water. But when he told me about the summer he crossed paths with the Axeman legend, I got goosebumps that didn't quit. This isn't some History Channel rerun about a killer from 1919. It's personal, it's real, and it's messed up. Charlie swears something followed him home that year, and after hearing him tell it, I don't sleep easy when I visit NOLA anymore. Here's what he told me, and trust me, it'll stick with you. It was the summer of 2003 and Charlie was 17, living in a creaky shotgun house in the lower 9th Ward with his mom, Diane, and his kid sister, Lena, who was 12 going on trouble. New Orleans was a sauna back then, humidity so thick you could chew it, air buzzing with cicadas and the faint tang of swamp water. Their house was nothing special, peeling yellow paint, a sagging porch, and windows that rattled in the slightest breeze. Charlie was your typical teenager, skateboarding through potholed streets, sneaking smokes behind the corner store, dodging cops who didn't like his vibe. He wasn't into ghost stories, not like Lena, but he loved the city's gritty myths. Voodoo curses, pirate gold, and the Axeman, the boogeyman of 1918. Everybody in NOLA knew about the Axeman. He wasn't just a serial killer, he was a nightmare with a hatchet. Back in 1918 and 1919 he'd break into houses, sometimes smashing doors with his axe, and hack up whoever was inside. Italian grocers, old men, even a kid, no one was safe. He'd vanish before the cops could blink, leaving blood and questions. The papers called him a demon, especially after he sent letters taunting the city, claiming he wasn't human, just a shadow from hell. Charlie's grandpa used to spin Axeman yarns at family barbecues, his voice low over the crackle of grilling shrimp. "Lock your doors, boy," he'd say, winking. He's still out there waiting for the jazz to stop. Charlie figured it was just old man nonsense, something to scare kids into behaving. But he'd read enough in school to know the stories were real. Joseph Maggio and his wife, skulls split open in their bed. Louis Bessumer left bleeding next to his dead mistress. A pregnant woman bashed in the face. A toddler killed in her mom's arms. The guy was a monster, no doubt. What creeped Charlie out most was the Axeman's letter from March 1919. The killer wrote to the Times-Picayune, saying he'd strike again on March 19, 15 minutes past midnight, but he'd spare any house playing jazz. That night, New Orleans turned into a street party, brass bands on every corner, pianos pounding in bars, folks dancing till dawn. No one died. It was like the Axeman was playing a sick game, holding the city hostage with a song. Some locals even wrote back through the papers, daring him to show up. One guy offered to leave his windows open, polite as you please, just to see who'd win. By 2003 it was ancient history, a ghost story for tourists. Charlie didn't buy into it, not yet. That summer, Lena got obsessed. She'd found a beat-up library book on New Orleans murders, dog-eared at the Axeman chapter. She'd read it to Charlie at night, her voice hushed, describing how the killer would slip through shadows, his axe gleaming under the moon. What if he never left? She'd ask, her eyes glinting. Charlie would scoff. Lena, he'd be older than dirt. Chill out. But she'd push, saying maybe he wasn't human. Maybe he was a curse tied to the city's bones. She'd spin wild theories. He was a voodoo spirit, a demon pissed off by progress, or even a ghost who hated silence. Charlie thought she watched too many scary movies, but her words stuck, burrowing like splinters. One sticky evening in July, their mom was pulling a double shift at the hospital, leaving Charlie and Lena alone. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of jasmine and fried fish from a neighbor's kitchen. They were camped out on the living room couch, half watching a slasher flick on their grainy TV, the fan rattling in the corner. Lena, sprawled with her book, started up again. You know tomorrow's the anniversary of an Axeman hit? August 5, 1918, he got that pregnant lady, Mrs. Schneider, right in the face. Charlie groaned, tossing a pillow at her. Can you not? I'm trying to watch this. But Lena grinned, sensing a weak spot. Bet you're too scared to visit one of his spots. Like the Romano house on Gravier Street, it's still there. Chicken? Charlie wasn't scared, not exactly. More like irritated. Lena had this knack for goading him, and he hated losing to her. Fine, he snapped. I'll go. Happy? Her face lit up like she'd won the lottery. The next evening he grabbed his skateboard, a flashlight, and his mom's old pocket knife just in case. Lock the door, he told Lena, trying to sound like he meant business. Don't open it for nobody but me. She saluted, smirking, and he rolled out into the dusk, the sky bruising purple over the Mississippi. Gravier Street was a half-hour ride, past flickering neon signs, jazz clubs spilling saxophone notes, and alleys that smelled of piss and magnolias. The Romano house was still standing, an old Creole cottage, its boards warped, its shutters hanging like broken teeth. Charlie parked his board, feeling like an idiot. What was he expecting? A glowing axe? A sign saying killer was here? He swept his flashlight over the porch, the beam catching spiderwebs and cracked glass. It didn't feel haunted, just forgotten, like the city had moved on and left it to rot. Then he heard it, a low, steady thud-thud-thud like someone splitting logs. It came from the backyard, faint but clear. His gut clenched, but he told himself it was nothing. Maybe a neighbor fixing a fence. Curiosity got the better of him, though, and he crept around the side, his sneakers crunching on gravel. The yard was a jungle of weeds, vines strangling a rusted swing set. At the far end stood a shed, its door sagging on one hinge. The thudding stopped, replaced by a slow creak, like something heavy shifting inside. Charlie's flashlight shook as he aimed it at the shed. Anyone there? He called, his voice thin. Silence except for the buzz of mosquitoes. He stepped closer, heart hammering, and peered through the gap. There against the wall was an axe, rusted, handle splintered, but unmistakable. It glinted in the beam like it was waiting for him. He stumbled back, tripping over a brick, and ran like hell. He didn't stop until he was halfway home, his shirt soaked, his breath ragged. The whole ride he felt it, eyes boring into his back, a shadow just out of reach. When he burst through the door, Lena was waiting, bouncing on her toes. Well, see anything spooky? He didn't mention the axe, couldn't find the words. Just muttered, it was lame, and triple-checked the locks. Lena pouted but let it go, flipping on the TV to drown out the quiet. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The house felt off, like someone had turned the thermostat to wrong. Charlie lay there, staring at the ceiling fan, its blades slicing the dark. Around 2 a.m. he heard it, a soft tap-tap-tap on the front door. Not a knock, more like fingers brushing the wood, testing it. He held his breath, hoping it was a raccoon or a branch. Then it came again, sharper, followed by a slow, metallic scrape, like a blade dragging across the grain. His skin prickled. He grabbed the pocket knife, not much but better than nothing, and tiptoed to the living room, keeping to the shadows. The tapping stopped, but now there were footsteps, boots, heavy and slow, circling the house. They paused at the kitchen window, then Lena's room, then his. Each step was deliberate, like whatever it was knew he was listening. Lena's scream split the air. Charlie sprinted to her room, finding her huddled on the bed, her face ghost white. There's someone outside, she whispered, pointing at the window. The curtains were open, framing a sliver of moonlight, but nothing moved. He yanked them shut, his hands shaking so bad he nearly tore the rod down. Stay here, he said, though he had no clue what to do. He checked every lock, every window, the knife slick in his palm. The footsteps faded and the night went still, but he sat up till dawn, Lena curled against him, both of them too scared to speak. Morning brought rain, a gray drizzle that made the city feel like it was underwater. They checked the yard. No footprints, no scratches, nothing to prove it wasn't a dream. But Lena swore she'd seen a figure, tall, faceless, holding something that gleamed. Charlie didn't argue, he'd felt it too. He told their mom when she got home, leaving out the part about sneaking to Graveyard Street so she wouldn't flip. Diane sighed, blamed it on damn kids playing pranks and promised to get better locks. Charlie nodded, but he knew it wasn't kids. He kept seeing that axe, kept hearing that scrape like it was burned into his brain. Things got weirder. A few nights later, Lena dragged him to the kitchen, her eyes huge. She'd printed an old article from the library, March 1919, the Axeman's letter. He said he'd come back if the jazz stopped, she whispered. What if you pissed him off by going there? Charlie forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. He started noticing stuff. A cold patch in the hallway that made his breath fog, shadows in the bathroom mirror, gone when he turned, the faint smell of rust in his room like old metal. One night, he woke to music, a brassy, mournful jazz tune, like a trumpet crying blocks away. He checked his radio, his phone. Nothing was playing. Lena heard it too, sitting up in her bed, clutching her pillow. It's him, she said, barely audible. He wants us to play. Charlie didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but he wasn't taking chances. He dug out his grandpa's saxophone from a dusty attic box, its case smelling of mildew. He hadn't touched it since middle school band, but he blew a few shaky notes, the sound wobbling through the house. The phantom music stopped. Maybe it was nothing, but his hands didn't stop trembling until morning. Lena started sleeping with a lamp on, saying she dreamed of a man with no eyes, an axe swinging in his hand. Charlie found marks on the back door, long, shallow scratches, too precise for a stray cat. He stopped skating near Graveyard Street, but the feeling followed him. Eyes in the dark, a weight pressing on his chest like someone standing over his bed. He told me about it years later at a dive bar off Frenchman Street, the kind with sticky floors and neon signs. I thought I was going crazy, he said, staring into his beer. Every night I'd wait for that tap, like he was testing me. I never went back to that house, not once. I asked if he thought it was the Axeman, like for real. He shrugged, his eyes distant. Don't know. But I saw that axe, man. It wasn't just sitting there, it was waiting. I didn't push him. The way he said it, quiet and heavy, made me believe. It didn't stop right away. August dragged on, hotter and meaner, and the weirdness kept creeping. One night, Charlie caught a glimpse outside, a shadow moving fast, too tall to be a neighbor. Another time, Lena found her book open to the Axeman chapter, though she swore she'd left it closed. Charlie started carrying the pocket knife everywhere, even to bed. He'd play the sax when the house felt wrong, old jazz tunes his grandpa taught him, Basin Street blues, When the Saints. It seemed to help, like the music pushed something back. Lena made him promise not to tell their mom. She was stressed enough, working doubles to keep them fed. But they both felt it, the house wasn't theirs anymore. By September, things tapered off. School started, routine took over, and the tapping didn't come back. They moved the next summer. New place in Gentilly, smaller but brighter, no cold spots or rusty smells. Lena's a nurse now, got a husband and a baby girl, and she doesn't talk about that year unless you pry. Charlie's married too, runs his own garage, keeps his life simple. But he's got a radio by his bed, always tuned to WWZ, jazz humming through the night. Keeps the air right, he says, not quite joking. He taught himself more sax tunes, plays them on his porch sometimes, says it's for his grandpa. I think it's for something else. I've been to New Orleans a few times since, and I stick to the quarter. Bright lights, drunk tourists, no shadows with axes. But when I pass those old cottages, their shutters creaking, I think of Charlie's story. He showed me a photo once from right after that summer. Him and Lena on the porch, smiling, but their eyes are tired, like they've seen something they can't unsee. I don't know what was out there, a ghost, a trick of the mind, or some creep who knew the legend and played along. All I know is when I'm in NOLA, I keep my windows shut, and I make damn sure there's a trumpet playing somewhere close.
We first spotted the town from the ridge above Elk Creek. I'm Josh, and my friends Mike and Sarah had driven up for a weekend away from city noise. Elk Creek was our usual escape: quiet trails, a small lake, and a single gas station that barely stocked essentials. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just trees and hills. Perfect for unplugging. On our second afternoon, after hiking to the ridge, Mike pointed toward a hollow between the hills. "Do you see that?" he said, shading his eyes. There it was, a cluster of rooftops peeking through the pines, maybe 3 or 4 miles off. No smoke rising. No cars moving. Just rooftops, frozen in place. Sarah squinted. Was that on the map? I fumbled my paper map, dog-eared and folded so many times it was almost torn. Nothing. It's not marked. That night at the gas station, we asked the attendant, an old guy named Earl with wireframe glasses and arms covered in faded tattoos, about the mystery town. He paused, his hand hovering over a dusty pack of gum. "Birchwood," he said finally, voice low. "Used to be a real place back in the day. Folks started leaving in the late 90s. By 2000, nobody lived there. Or so they say." "What happened?" Sarah asked. Earl shrugged. "No one really knows. People just vanished or died. Search parties went in, didn't find much. After a while, no one cared." We looked at each other, and I swear you could almost see the idea spark. "Let's go," Mike said. The next morning, we loaded our gear into my old Jeep, a cooler, backpacks, flashlights, and headed down the overgrown path that must have once been a dirt road. Branches scratched the paint, roots nearly lifted us off the ground. After an hour of bumping and swearing, the trees opened up, and we rolled into what had once been Main Street. Birchwood lay silent. Dozens of buildings in various states of decay, a general store with its sign half fallen, a diner with broken neon letters, a tiny schoolhouse with its playground equipment rusting. No birds. No wind. Just an eerie stillness, as if sound itself was scared to enter. We parked near the old town hall. Mike cut the engine. "Ready?" Sarah tightened her ponytail. "Let's stick together." Classic horror move, right? But we weren't thinking about horror movies. We were thinking about adventure, finding relics, maybe an old camera with photos, letters in dusty drawers. Nothing violent. Just history. Our first stop was a small ranch-style house on the corner. White paint peeled off its siding. The front door hung on one hinge. Inside, dust lay thick as a blanket. I kicked aside a broken chair and stepped into the living room. Family photos still hung on the wall, smiling faces from the 80s. A knitted afghan lay folded on the couch. A child's toy truck lay abandoned on the floor. Everything spoke of normal life, until I caught the smell. It was like rotten meat, sour and sharp. My stomach clenched. I moved toward the kitchen doorway. There, seated at a table, were 2 figures. No movement. Just 2 bodies so decomposed they were half skeleton, clothes hanging loose, hair matted. One still held a spoon over a dusty plate. I froze. My flashlight clattered to the floor. My heart pounded. Then I stumbled backward, tripped, and crashed through the doorway. Once I was outside, I knelt in the dirt and vomited. Mike and Sarah came running. They'd each seen their own horrors. Sarah had found a living room with a father, mother, and little girl, all slumped on the sofa. Their skin had turned a sick gray, eyes sunken. No blood. No sign of struggle. Mike discovered a bedroom where 2 teenage boys lay side by side, faces frozen in surprise. A half-finished board game sat on the nightstand. We gathered on the cracked sidewalk, pale and shaking. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered. "Keep going," Mike said, though his voice wavered. "We need to see more. Figure out what happened." I wanted to argue. To say we should leave. But curiosity clawed at me. We headed toward the diner, the big, neon-framed one down the street. Its sign read, Maggie's Diner, though the M and A were dark. Inside, booths sat empty, menus still on tables. The counter was lined with stools, one knocked over. Coffee cups, plates with half-eaten slices of pie, sugar shakers, all coated in dust. No bodies here, but every so often I thought I heard a creak, like someone shifting in a booth. I spun around. Nothing. We moved on to the post office. Rows of mailboxes stood open, letters spilling out. I picked up an envelope addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. Postmarked June 1999. Inside was a photograph of a smiling couple standing in front of that very post office. I slipped it into my pocket. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright. Shadows seemed to shrink away. We followed a gravel path toward the church at the far end of town. Its steeple leaned at a slight angle, windows boarded up. A bell hung inside the tower, rusted. The front doors were cracked open. We pushed inside. Pews lay scattered, hymnals strewn across the floor. The altar cloth was gray with dust. But there was something else, scratches on the wooden pews, like long, deep gouges. They led toward the back. My flashlight beam caught something on the altar steps, footprints. Dusty, muddy prints, like someone had walked through from outside. They ended halfway up the steps. "Who's here?" Sarah's voice trembled. No answer. We crept forward, hearts in our throats. That's when the light went out. Total darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, dead battery. Mike's light flickered, then stayed dark. Sarah whimpered. A distant sound echoed, a door creaking shut. Slow. Deliberate. I grabbed Sarah's hand. Mike pushed toward the exit. We barreled out of the church into the blinding afternoon light, panting. Back on Main Street, we regrouped. "Something's wrong," I said, voice low. "These houses, the bodies, nobody cleaned them up? Why would they leave them?" Sarah shivered. "This place feels alive. Like it's watching us." Mike's jaw was tight. "I just want to know what happened. Then we leave. I promise." We decided to check one more building before heading back to camp, a 2-story house with a porch swing hanging at an odd angle. The front steps creaked under our weight. Inside, wallpaper peeled like dead skin. A grand staircase curved upward. We climbed, each step groaning. On the second floor, a hallway stretched into darkness. Doors on either side, some closed, some open. From one room came a soft hum, like a lullaby on a broken record. Sarah held up her light. In the corner of the room, a small music box spun, its lid open. The tune was slow, warped. No bodies here, but toys lay scattered, dolls with missing limbs. A toy train stopped mid-track. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind us. The humming music box stopped. Silence swallowed the hallway. I yanked at the doorknob. Locked. Sarah pounded. Mike tried to break it down. Nothing worked. Then, a whisper, barely audible, "Help us." We froze. The whisper came again, closer, "Help us." Panic rose. Mike shouted, "Get the door open." I slammed my shoulder against it. Wood splintered. The lock gave way. We tumbled into the hallway and sprinted down the stairs, 2 at a time, until we burst outside. The porch swing was still, but the front door slammed behind us, as if something inside wanted to keep us there. We didn't speak until we reached my Jeep. Doors slammed, engines roared, and we tore down the overgrown path without looking back. Trees whipped past the windows. Dust clouded behind us. Only when we reached the paved road did we slow. The 3 of us sat in silence, breathing hard. Finally, Sarah said, "That whisper, did you hear it?" Mike swallowed. "Yeah. We shouldn't have come here." I nodded. "Let's get out of here. Now." We didn't stop until we were back at the cabin in Elk Creek. Night had fallen, and the woods felt alive with sounds, owls, rustling leaves, distant howls. I lay in my sleeping bag, eyes open, replaying every moment. Why were the bodies left? Why the music box? And who, or what, was whispering? In the darkness, I vowed, tomorrow, we'd return to Birchwood. We had to know what happened. But as I drifted toward sleep, I wondered if that was the worst idea I'd ever had. When dawn broke over Elk Creek, I couldn't shake the images of Birchwood. The bodies. The whisper. The music box. Mike and Sarah were already loading my Jeep when I stumbled out of the cabin. "Ready?" Mike's voice was tight. Sarah nodded, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "Let's finish this." We drove back along the narrow road, headlights cutting through morning mist. The path to Birchwood seemed longer this time, the trees crowding in as if to keep us out. By the time we reached the town, the sun was high enough to chase away most shadows, but Birchwood looked even more desolate in daylight. Windows stared blankly, doors hung ajar, and the silence felt alive, as if the town itself was watching. We headed first for the church. The front doors were firmly shut, but at the back a side window hung open. Inside, pews lay scattered and hymnals were torn to pieces. Sunlight streamed through holes in the roof, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. My flashlight barely cut through the gloom beyond the sunbeams. Then we heard it, a faint, distant hum like chanting carried on a cold draft. At the altar, the wooden panel covering a small door looked loose. We pried it open and found a narrow stairwell descending into blackness. The chanting grew louder as we climbed down. The walls were damp stone, slick with moss. At the bottom, we stepped into a circular chamber. Burnt-out candles stood in a ring around a low stone altar, symbols carved into the floor that twisted together in impossible shapes. In the center lay a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed and curling. I approached with trembling hands and opened it. The writing was scrawled in a language I couldn't name, but across one page in English were words that froze my blood. We bind them here, their spirits remain. To hold the veil, so death's domain does not spill forth and claim the living. The chanting stopped. Silence pressed in. Mike pointed to the walls, where faint red stains traced the carvings. Sarah's light fell on something half buried in dust, a human finger bone. A deep rumble shook the chamber. Candle holders rattled. From the shadows came a voice, guttural and ancient, "Release us." We fled up the stairs and burst into the church nave, gasping for air as the stone door slammed shut behind us. Dust rained from the ceiling. I shoved at the door, it wouldn't budge. Sarah screamed when a shadow moved across the altar, too large to be human. Mike found a side exit, yanked it open, and we tumbled out into the blinding afternoon light. The moment we cleared the threshold, the chanting ceased. Back on Main Street, hearts pounding, we realized Birchwood wasn't abandoned, it was sealed. The townspeople hadn't left, they'd been bound here. And something had been waiting for release. A cold wind carried a distant, childish laughter that made my blood run cold. We raced to Maggie's diner, hoping to find clues. Inside, fresh dust coated every surface, as if the town were reliving its decay in fast motion. On the counter lay a newspaper face up. The headline read, "Birchwood Disappearances, Entire Town Vanishes Overnight." Dated July 15, 2000, it described how all 142 residents vanished without a trace, leaving behind empty houses and silent streets. Search teams found everything intact, except the people. I felt a chill. We'd seen the bodies, but now we knew the town had tried to keep itself sealed. We spent the next hour racing through buildings. The more we looked, the more the town seemed to shift. Houses we'd entered earlier now had new rooms, streets curved where they hadn't before. It was as if Birchwood was alive, rearranging itself to trap us. By midday, a heavy fog rolled in, swallowing Main Street. We stuck close, shouting each other's names. Through the fog appeared a figure, tall, thin, cloaked in rags, its face hidden. It moved with jerky, unnatural motions, pointing at us with a bone-white hand. Then more figures emerged, dozens of them, their faces twisted in silent screams, eyes glowing pale. The bodies we'd seen earlier, now standing upright and watching. Sarah screamed. Mike grabbed her arm. "Run," we all shouted. We bolted down the street, the dead following in eerie silence. Their bones scraped the pavement as they moved. We reached the church steps and the side door stood open as if waiting. No chanting this time, just a deafening hush. I shoved my friends inside, and we slammed the door behind us. In the circular chamber, the leather book lay open again. Candles reignited, flickering to life. The carvings on the floor glowed red. The shadows on the walls writhed, as though alive. A voice echoed from every corner, "You shall bind the living, to free the dead." I fumbled through the pages until I found an incantation in English. "By blood unspilled and breath unseen. We release the veil, let all convene." We looked at each other, terror in our eyes, but we knew what we had to do. Sarah found a shard of metal and pricked her palm. Mike did the same. I dripped my blood onto the altar stone. Together, we chanted the words. The candles blazed. The walls trembled. Outside, the dead beat against the door, their hollow voices chanting with us. By blood unspilled and breath unseen. We release the veil, let all convene. The ground shook violently, and a blinding light filled the chamber. Then, silence. The candles snuffed out. The book snapped shut. The stone door creaked open. We stumbled into the church nave. Sunlight streamed through the broken roof. No fog. No dead. No chanting. We raced back to the jeep, adrenaline pumping, and tore down the overgrown path without looking back. Trees whipped past the windows, dust clouded behind us. When we finally slowed on the paved road, Sarah whispered, "Did we do it?" I started the engine. "I don't know. Let's get out of here." Back at Elk Creek, we unloaded in silence. The sun set blood-red over the hills. We promised never to speak of Birchwood again. Weeks later, I tried to find the town on satellite maps, nothing. Just endless forest. I searched news archives, only a brief mention of a place called Birchwood in the 1920s, wiped out by a forest fire. No disappearances in 2000. I keep the newspaper clipping and the book page in a box under my bed. Sometimes at night, I dream of chanting and candlelight, of shadows reaching out. I wonder if we released something, or trapped ourselves forever. So if you ever hear chanting in the dark, or find an old music box playing by itself, do yourself a favor. Run. And whatever you do, don't look back. You won't believe what happened to my friend Emily a few years back. She swears it's all true, and after hearing her story, I'm half convinced ghosts are real. It starts with a marriage that everyone saw as a disaster waiting to happen, except Emily, who was too blinded by love to care. She was only 19 when she announced she was tying the knot with Trevor Jones, a guy with a reputation that could make your skin crawl. Her parents begged her to reconsider, her friends practically staged an intervention, but Emily wouldn't hear it. Trevor was trouble, everyone knew it. He was the kind of guy who'd stumble into bar fights, hang out with sketchy drifters, and drink like his life depended on it. Sure, he had charm, a quick wit, and a smile that could melt hearts, but living with him? That was a nightmare no one wanted for her. Emily didn't care that Trevor had no money, no real job, and zero ambition to change. She saw him as her wild, rebellious soulmate, and at 19, maybe she was too young to see the red flags waving like banners in a storm. Her parents cried through the whole wedding, not tears of joy, mind you, but heartbreak. They were handing their bright, beautiful daughter over to a man who didn't deserve her in a million years. The reception was tense, with forced smiles and whispered worries, but Emily glowed like she'd won the lottery. She had no idea what was coming. Life with Trevor started unraveling fast. At first, she tried to brush it off, his drinking, his loud mouth, the way he'd ignore her like she was invisible. But it got worse. He'd stumble home wasted, reeking of cheap beer, and soon he started inviting his buddies over. These weren't the kind of friends you'd want around, rough, rowdy guys who'd knock back whiskey until they could barely stand. It always ended the same way. Someone would bring up an old grudge, fists would fly, and by morning, the living room looked like a tornado had hit it. Broken chairs, shattered plates, cigarette butts stubbed out on the carpet. Emily would hide in the bedroom, pressing a pillow over her ears to drown out the chaos. If it got really bad, she'd lock herself in the bathroom, sitting on the cold tile, wondering how her fairy tale had turned into this. She didn't tell her parents. They'd worried enough, and she couldn't bear the thought of them knowing how right they'd been. Mornings were the worst. She'd creep out to find Trevor sprawled on the couch or the floor, drooling and half dead to the world. If his friends were still there, she'd have to shoo them out like stray dogs, their slurred protests echoing down the hall. Trevor quit his dead-end job at some warehouse not long after the wedding, leaving Emily to pay the bills. She worked double shifts at a diner, her hands raw from scrubbing plates, while he slept off hangovers. Less than a year in, her world lost all color. It was a gray, suffocating hell. She tried talking to him, pleading for change, but it was like shouting into a void. Mention divorce, though, and he'd flip, his eyes would darken, his voice would growl, and she'd shrink back, afraid of what he might do next. Trevor got paranoid, too. He'd accuse her of cheating, his jealousy flaring up over nothing, a glance from a coworker, a text from a friend. He'd scream, throw things, and eventually, he started hitting her. Not often, but enough to leave marks she'd hide under long sleeves. It didn't last long, though, not because he stopped, but because fate stepped in. One night, Trevor and his crew were staggering home from a dive bar. They were so drunk they couldn't see straight, weaving down a pitch-black road with no streetlights. A truck came out of nowhere, tires squealed, metal crunched, and when the dust settled, Trevor was the only one who didn't walk away. The others got bruises and a scare. He got a one-way ticket to the morgue. Emily didn't shed a tear. She felt like she'd been let out of a cage. Her parents hugged her tight, her friends toasted to her freedom, and she told herself she'd never fall for a guy like that again. She was still young, barely 20, with her whole life ahead of her. The apartment felt lighter without him, like the air wasn't so thick with tension. She thought the nightmare was over. She was wrong. About a month after Trevor's death, right around the 40-day mark, if you believe in that kind of thing, weird stuff started happening. It was little things at first, the fridge door swinging open in the middle of the night, a jar of pickles crashing to the floor. She'd wake up to clothes spilling out of the closet like someone had rummaged through it. The curtain rod in the living room fell 3 times in 1 week, the heavy drapes crumpled on the carpet as if yanked by an angry hand. At night, she'd hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, creaking across the hardwood. She'd lie there, heart pounding, telling herself it was the neighbors or the old building settling. But deep down, she knew better. Then the TV started turning on by itself. Always around 2 a.m., the screen flickering to life with static before settling on some late-night car show, Trevor's favorite. She'd huddle under the blankets, too scared to move, the volume blaring through the walls. Sleep became a stranger. She'd drag herself to work, her eyes sunken, her skin pale, and people started whispering she looked like a ghost herself. She told a few coworkers about it, hoping for advice, but they just patted her arm and said it was grief playing tricks. "You lost your husband," they'd say. "Even a jerk like him leaves a mark." She wanted to believe them, but the footsteps, the TV, it wasn't her imagination. For a while, it'd stop. A week of quiet, maybe 2, and she'd convince herself it was over. She'd light candles, play music, try to reclaim her space. But then it'd come back, worse than before. One night, she jolted awake to a loud crash in the hall. The coat rack by the door had toppled, jackets and bags scattered everywhere. Groggy, she shuffled out to clean it up, her bare feet cold against the floor. She reached for the light switch, and froze. In the dim glow from the street lamp outside, she saw him. A shadowy figure sprawled in the hallway, struggling to stand. He kept slipping, arms flailing, knocking the rack over again. Her breath caught in her throat, her body locked in place. The figure groaned, a low, guttural sound, and stretched a hand toward her, fingers trembling like it wanted her to pull it up. She couldn't scream, couldn't run. Her mind raced back to a memory, her grandma, years ago, telling her, "If you ever see a spirit, ask who it is. If it answers, it's not evil. If it doesn't, run." Her voice shook as she whispered, "Who are you?" The air turned icy. Then came the reply, a rasping, bone-chilling hiss, like an old hag gargling gravel. "Who else? Your husband." Her knees buckled. She stumbled back, bolted to her room, and dove under the covers, shaking until dawn. The hallway stayed quiet after that, but she could still feel him out there, lingering. The next day, she broke down. It was Trevor, had to be. He'd come home like that so many times, drunk and helpless, begging her to drag him to bed. Now he was dead, and he wouldn't leave her alone. She called a priest, but he couldn't come until Monday. That left her with 2 days to survive. Her parents' place was packed with visiting cousins, her best friend was shacked up with her boyfriend, no one could take her in. She was trapped. Desperate, she remembered a guy I know from a nearby town who'd once raved about a psychic who'd fixed his haunted basement problem. She got the number and dialed, her voice cracking as she begged the woman to come. An hour later, Maria showed up, a plump, gray-haired lady in a cardigan, looking more like a librarian than a medium. She walked through the apartment, running her hands over the walls, the couch, the fridge. "He's still here," she said, her tone flat. Emily stammered, "But he's dead." "That's impossible." Maria shrugged. "Not impossible. He doesn't know he's gone. Died too fast, too drunk. He's stuck, wandering in his own little purgatory, thinking he's still kicking. Opens the fridge, flips on the TV, sound familiar." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He was a sinner," Maria went on. "This place stinks of booze and bad choices. He's not welcome upstairs or down below, so he's here. We've got to send him packing, or he'll wear you out." Maria paused, her eyes narrowing. "Heard his voice yet?" Emily swallowed. "Yeah, last night. But it didn't sound like him, it was wrong." Maria nodded grimly. "That's what he sounds like now. Cursed, rotten. I'll do a ritual. Wait outside, it's not for your eyes. He'll be gone by morning, but he'll fight tonight. At 3 a.m., come out and tell him, loud and clear, get out. You're dead. I'm in charge. Don't skip it, or he'll stay. Call a priest after to seal it." Emily felt sick, but she nodded. She stood on the stairwell for over an hour, shivering in her pajamas, while muffled chants and the smell of sage drifted through the door. Maria emerged sweaty and stern, promising Trevor would be gone by sunrise. That night, Emily waited. It was quiet at first, too quiet. She almost hoped it was over already. Then, around midnight, a bang echoed from the hall. Her stomach dropped. The noises grew, shuffling, thumping, something dragging across the floor. She curled into a ball, clutching her blanket, her pulse racing. Emily, that awful voice slithered through the dark, high and cracked. She bit her lip to keep from screaming, tears soaking her pillow. The kitchen erupted, plates smashing, cabinet slamming. She checked her watch, 2:45 a.m. 15 minutes to go. The chaos got louder, closer. "Emily, where are you?" it crooned, mocking her. She gripped the watch, counting down. At 3 o'clock, she forced herself up, legs trembling. The apartment was a war zone, dishes shattered, chairs tipped over. She stepped into the kitchen and saw him, a black silhouette, hunched and swaying, just like Trevor after a bender. He wheezed, his outline flickering in the dark. She sucked in a breath and yelled, "Get out. You're dead. I'm in charge." The figure lurched, doubling over like it had been punched, and let out a wail, a shriek that clawed at her skull. She fumbled for the light switch, but it clicked uselessly. He hit the floor with a thud, one arm reaching out. "Help me, Emily," that voice rasped, pitiful and furious. "Get out. You're dead," she screamed again, her throat raw. "No, no, not dead, no," he moaned, over and over, like a broken record. She ran back to her room, slammed the door, and pressed her hands to her ears until the words faded. Exhaustion hit, and she blacked out. Sunlight woke her. The apartment was silent, eerily so. She crept out, stepping over broken glass and scattered coats. No footsteps, no voices. She cleaned up in a daze, her body heavy but her heart lighter. That night, she slept, really slept, for the first time in weeks, a relieved sob catching in her throat as she drifted off. The priest came Monday, blessed the place, and left her with a candle to burn for good measure. The weirdness stopped. No more shadows, no more late-night TV. Emily started healing, the fear fading like a bad dream. Months later, she met a guy, quiet, steady, the opposite of Trevor. They're married now, happy. She doesn't talk about her first husband much, and he's never shown up in her nightmares. Sometimes, she'll pause at a random noise, a creak, a thud, but then she laughs it off. Probably just the wind, she says. Probably.